This is the best of the relaunch Star Treks, and it's not great. It's been 4 years since the conclusion of Star Trek Enterprise. That series went through a lot, to put it mildly. Want to hear my thoughts on that show? Check out my review. What do you do with Star Trek now after it being canceled? Let's go make a prequel and sequel movie. That'll turn out great. Okay, I'm the fair guy. What's the good? Star Trek 2009 was always going to be really hard to do. Star Trek has run for a long time. There's a lot of history and lore behind it. Star Trek, you can argue its audience is the most knowledgeable, the most picky, versus other properties. Not that I'm saying people don't know how many kyber crystals are in a lightsaber, or Star Wars hasn't written crap. Book of Boba Fett's finale is a recent example of bad everything. But we'll point out that Dr. Phlox used the comm panel in a Mirror Darkly wrong. We know a lot about the shows and the characters. This makes it very hard to come up with original ideas without stepping on something a writer wrote in passing 15 years ago. Or you wanting to do new things with existing characters. What do you do to make this easier, quote unquote? '09 came up with a cool idea of making this an alternate timeline. I like this. Star Trek has explored all kinds of time travel stories. A lot of these episodes were great. Cause and Effect, Time's Arrow, City on the Edge Forever, Year of Hell, E Squared, Children of Time. They all use time travel in different ways. It's the best thing '09 had going for it. You want to tell stories that don't fully work with what's established, but you want to avoid making mistakes and plot lines that get contradicted in later series, so make it not affect those. Brilliant if you know what you're doing. Characters. Most of them I think were okay, Mr. Spock being the closest to his original background and issues he had in TOS. The other characters vary in quality due to how the movie utilized them. I never got this relationship. It was mainly just there because they didn't know what to give Uhura. The actors, I think all of them did good jobs being the characters. Probably my choice would go to Carl Urban as the best one. While this alternate stuff gave the writers the chance to come up with new things, they didn't do that past the first film. This is an origin story of the crew. Granted, it's an alternate timeline, but it's something that Star Trek hasn't done. But once '09 got okay reviews, Paramount's like, oh, we gotta keep making Star Trek like Star Wars. What can we use next? And we get a rehash of The Wrath of Khan. I'm not here to watch a Marvel What If version of a 30-year-old film. Tell me a new story and make this a Star Trek movie. I don't care how badly you want to make $1 billion. Star Trek is not $1 billion franchise. It's its own thing. Changing it doesn't make it become Star Wars. I thought it was also dumb that they were going to set the series as a prequel to the original Star Trek show. That in itself brings several bags on the plane. We already have a prequel series that failed, and I talked a little bit about this in my Enterprise review. Visual continuity is important to me in anything I read or watch. It's what makes up the world. There's a clear progression of time. You're dealing with a property that came out in the 1960s. For me, I would have zero problem of the movie being 100% identical to TOS. But I know that's not feasible. But the movie could have been much more closer to TOS than what they did. I'll focus on the USS Kelvin first because people like to use the argument of the Narada altering the timeline, which made Starfleet, etc. change their designs in response. Except this doesn't work due to the plot holes caused by the writers, and the fact that the USS Kelvin was built before the alternate timeline. Not to mention the Franklin in the third film. Kelvin shares the same design issues with the Enterprise later on. Now, some areas are actually closer to TOS than others, such as the shuttle the captain used aboard the Narada. It's shaped like the TOS shuttles, and the interiors use more buttons and switches. But for the most part, and this design problem also spills into Discovery, all match or look more advanced than what was done in the TNG era. So when you have scenes trying to reinforce that the '09 Enterprise, Discovery Enterprise, and Discovery are supposed to be old ships, that falls flat. The design changes even cause problems that the old shows didn't have. The biggest one being the bridge window. Every Star Trek series before 2009 used a view screen, which is just a big LCD screen, or in a few series, a holographic projector. Examples, the Enterprise D view screen has depth. Ops use the projected screen, as well as the first version of the view screen used on the Enterprise E. Windows are stupid because it makes the bridge extremely vulnerable to weapons fire. Most bridges are reinforced and even have hull armor in the Defiance case so that they have the best defenses when under attack. This causes a realism error and a tech continuity error. The Windows argument became such a dumb issue that it ended up being done on purpose by the production team because they made fun of it through dialogue and discovery. I'm thinking to myself, you guys literally showed one of the biggest flaws Windows have in the first episode of Discovery where they were blinded by light. That wouldn't have happened if you could change or just shut off the view screen. Other sci-fi shows have done the window thing, and I hate it there too. I like the Orville, but that huge ass window? No. And the only reason why they did this port change was simply to allow J.J. Abrams' love for lens flares. Not all lens flares are bad. They can add a cool factor to a shot, or the first time it was used to reveal the Kelvin bridge, that's fine. But the majority of the time, they're a distraction that blocks your view. You can complain I'm nitpicking, but when I see the production not care about how things work within a universe, it lowers my confidence in all the other areas. One minute the ships have all this super high-tech stuff, the next, they're shooting in real locations that have generic metal beams, corridors, and concrete, forcing the ships to be enlarged just to make sense of a problem they caused. Engineering used a real location for most of its shots. I think it was a beer refinery. It's the largest we've ever seen an engineering set done on Star Trek. It was so dumb to fit this room in the ship, the Enterprise had to be enlarged to a ridiculous size. The original Enterprise was roughly the size of an aircraft carrier. This version of it is bigger than the Enterprise D. Who thought it was a good idea to film in real locations? You can clearly see it's a building. I don't understand these decisions. The designs are all over the place. Speaking of designs, the Apple Prize. It's way too white. I can see where they try to keep the 60s feel, the chairs, the bendable side lights, but most of it is more advanced than TNG, and they also did the stupid generic see-through screens. I hate that in sci-fi shows. The easiest way to signal you're in the future, have a screen of glass that's not practical. It's not going to be a thing. Yeah, it can work in some applications like having a weather displayed on a mirror, not actual work. You won't be able to focus on anything. Go try to edit a video on something that lets you see what's behind it. Imagine you playing a game and someone's watching a movie behind you. Good luck trying to play Apex. I have to even mention a mistake that happened at the start of the movie. When the Kelvin is going on a collision course, no one in the team points out that they used the warp engine to move the ship. Star Trek ships have two propulsion systems. The impulse drive, which is used at sublight speeds, the red lights on the saucer are those engines, and the warp drive, which allows the ship to travel faster than light. They're not interchangeable, and I consider the 09 the best of the relaunched Star Trek shows. Oh god. Alright, what's the plot? Nero, commander of a Romulan mining vessel, goes after Ambassador Spock, who was attempting to prevent a supernova of Romulus' sun. He fails, the system is destroyed. Even though some blame has to go on the Romulans, you're attempting to do this risky thing to your son and you don't evacuate the planet whatsoever. Didn't this happen in an episode of TNG where they attempt to fix a star in a star system that is uninhabited, so if they screw up, billions of lives don't get vaporized? Yeah, writing has gotten worse on Star Trek. There's a lot of questions that get opened up from this event that gets worse in the Picard series. Anyway, causing a temporal anomaly to form. The Narada is sucked into it as well as old Spock. It spits them out at two different time periods, one in 2233 followed by old Spock 25 years later. The Narada destroys the USS Kelvin, setting in motion the alternate timeline. The premise is not a bad idea. The problem lies with them wanting to make everything linked to the TOS cast. The Narada conveniently attacks the ship that has the mother and father of James Kirk on board, while he's being born no less. The movie is filled with a lot of conveniences, which Alex Kurtzman and Roberto Orci love to do. See my review on Amazing Spider-Man 2, where all this does is cause plot holes later on. Now, because of the death of George Kirk, this causes changes to James Kirk. The movie decides to show this in a way of him stealing a car, doing crazy things, showing his life being crap, I guess. This is confusing. Two big reasons. Obviously, Kirk's mom remarried, but she remarried some piece of garbage? But how could she not see who the guy really is? James wouldn't steal the car for no reason. He obviously had problems with the stepfather. The older son doesn't do anything. Also, Kirk's mom isn't doing anything about the Narada. They're not trying to look for it. What happened to it? There's a lot to unpack with the scene, but no time to get into it. It's just here to set up Kirk's personality with no proper care to how the character reaches this point. Either the movie is saying the mom is a bad parent, or James is a POS where he's taking out his father's death on everyone. Either way, it ruins Kirk or his mom. This also includes the car too. It's a continuity problem with Star Trek, and a garbage forced advertisement on top of it. Star Trek has established that cars have been abandoned many years ago. In TOS, Kirk doesn't really understand what a car is until Spock explained it. This is repeated again in Star Trek 4. In Star Trek Voyager, Harry didn't understand what a car was. Even Tuvok was unfamiliar with it. Spock probably only knew about cars because of his interest to his human side. The only person that's ever shown interest in cars is Tom Paris. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible for someone to not like cars in the future. I mentioned Paris, but it's established that cars are basically forgotten. Give or take a decade from now, kids won't even know what the hell a phone booth is. But my biggest problem here is if everyone's moved on from cars, Star Trek has shuttles and other types of vehicles, why the hell are there roads still around Earth? In Star Trek The Motion Picture, which was the first big time we got to see 23rd century Earth, minus a few matte paintings in TOS, they thought about what the Golden Gate Bridge is used for. If you pay attention to either the original version or director's cut, the top of the car deck looks like it has solar panels. Maybe they're not solar panels, maybe it's a hover tram system. Either way, there's no road. So why is there roads in Iowa? They're not even consistent with the vehicles. Kid Kirk is being chased by a hover police car that looks like it came out of Blade Runner. Not to mention it can't even beat out a car with wheels. This type of problem seems to follow Abrams around. Remember the "they fly now" scene in Star Wars? Why the hell would you make vehicles with wheels? Then 20 years later, Kirk rolls up to the shuttle on his wheeled motorcycle. Again, you don't care what's in a scene, just get the character to where you need them. This is how you ruined Harry Osborn in Amazing 2. Don't get me started on the Nokia phone in the car. That's just blatant advertisement and makes no sense in Star Trek. Nokia barely exists as it is now. Earth has been through a third world war. Billions of people were wiped out. Companies would have collapsed. The brand would not exist, especially with money being no longer important on Earth. Even though you're working with an alternate timeline, you still have a box to work in. They did this because they wanted to have parallels between Kirk and Spock. You could have done something to this idea, but without causing all these story issues. Okay, so the second worst mistake they did in the movie. Now, there's a deleted scene that tries to justify what happened here, but regardless, if you just watch the theatrical version or include the deleted scene, it's all garbage and doesn't work. First, the theatrical version. George Kirk successfully disabled the Narada, which allowed the crew of the Kelvin to escape, and then 25 years pass. The Narada disappears, Nero vanishes, till he reached the time point where old Spock traveled through. Excuse me, teacher? I have a few questions. Explain to me why no Federation ship traveled to the Narada's position to find out what happened. It doesn't have to engage the ship, but keep tabs on it. They know it's disabled, a ship was attacked, lives were lost, other ships would eventually respond. But nothing happens. All we see in the movie is Nero's ship just flying through space 25 years later. He clearly does not care about changing history. He blew up the USS Kelvin. Why didn't he go to Romulus to tell them in a few hundred years their star would go nova? This makes no sense. He has a chance to save his people and his wife. It's an alternate timeline world, but it is his world. It'd be like if the Avengers in Endgame didn't steal the stones in the other timelines and just left their universe with half the population gone. Also, they're Romulans. They're worse than the Klingons of the TOS era. Don't tell me he wouldn't have gone back home and gave Romulans of this era his modern tech. The Star Empire wants to conquer. Look at all the attempts. Enterprise had to deal with a drone being controlled by an Enar. You have the neutral zone outpost to prevent further wars. You have the Enterprise incident where we saw Romulans use Klingon ships. Any type of advantage at any cost they would take. Don't tell me Nero wouldn't do this. Speaking of which, the Narada is a simple mining vessel. How the hell did they figure out where and when Spock would have emerged from time like they did? If this was the Enterprise or Voyager, I could believe that. They have science officers, their ships are designed for exploration, working with anomalies, on top of which the Narada has to stay hidden. I can buy them stealing tech or buying tech that could aid in this, but they're miners. I'm not going to expect someone in the crew to be experts in temporal mechanics. So none of this makes sense. But what about that deleted scene? Does that help? No, it actually makes it worse. Besides causing a continuity mistake with the Klingons look again, if this was kept in the movie, it would have made the Klingons look like complete morons. We are talking 25 years. In the original film, after the Narada was disabled, Nero and the others were captured and tortured. That bit of it works. Them vanishing and not killing people would be explained, but there's one little issue. No one takes the ship, no one steals the tech. Imagine this happened in the Mirror Darkly. The USS Defiant crossed into the Mirror universe, the Tholians captured the crew, but left the ship in orbit above their jail cell so that they could retake the ship once they escaped. No one takes the ship? It's not used against the Federation? Nothing? Kurtzman or C, stop treating the audience like idiots. You're insulting me. It begs more and more questions. If there is someone on board that understands time and can predict old Spock's arrival, why didn't Nero attempt to travel through time once he got the ship to save Romulus? We keep going further and further down the rabbit hole. There's one more good thing I can say about the film. It was a cool idea that they had Spock create the Kobayashi Maru test. Nothing there contradicts anything in the movies or shows. Captain Spock was running the test in Star Trek II, and in Star Trek V, he was used to test the new Briggs. I wish the ideas from this classic moment of Kirk would have been done through the rest of the film. It's a perfect example of where writers use what we know about the characters, fitting in naturally with them. Kirk would definitely argue with Spock on the matter. What's really good about the scene? Both guys are right. I'm on both their sides. I lean a little more to Kirk, where I would still allow it to be possible to beat the test. But of course, facing death is going to be a thing in Starfleet. No one's denying that. Deanna had to deal with that when facing her final test to become a commander, ordering Geordi to his death to save the ship. But being an officer also includes thinking outside the box. Look at all the times lives were saved because someone thought of a crazy idea. Dr. Crusher was able to beat the Borg vessel by tricking it into a corona ejection. Commander Riker broke the time loop and cause and effect, suggesting to vent the main shuttle bay's air. That's a skill that is a great asset that saved a lot of lives over the years. It hurts when I see good writing here, then right into the next scene where we have the Enterprise drop out of warp right in front of a debris field. That breaks standard Starfleet rules. All ships drop out of warp when they enter a system. The Enterprise D followed that rule even while a Borg cube was right on top of Earth. Billions of lives are in danger and they still followed that rule. B, while I did like the crew working together solving the mystery, it made no sense. How does Vulcan send out a distress signal without telling people they're being attacked? They all assume they just need help? Now, you could say Nero was jamming the signal, but then they shouldn't have gotten anything out at all. You can't have it both ways, where the ship is super advanced, but a sliver of a signal got through? C, do the Enterprise sensors not work? They would pick up the debris field, example best of both worlds, and if you want to argue the whole sensors being jammed, I would also immediately stop the ship suspecting an attack is going on the moment they don't work. Also, where the hell is the Enterprise's shields? Debris hits the engine like they're not there. The shields should have protected them from this. I can give examples, unless they were waiting for them to be installed on Tuesday. I need to speed up this review or I'll be here for 2 hours. I'm going to focus on the last few issues I have with the film, then talk about my rewrite. It's stupid that Kirk went from a cadet to first officer, then to captain of the Enterprise at the end. I don't care that you can give field commissions to people. Going from in training to captain is not acceptable. I don't care that he's Kirk. He's not a Digimon. In real life, people who are promoted at a time of war only go up a few ranks, and even then, still have to pass all the requirements for those higher ranks to remain at the new rank. Next up, Kirk being thrown off the ship. This was completely stupid. Yes, Kirk arguing with Spock is wrong. Yes, Kirk attacking the security officers is even worse, but he would be court-martialed at that point. But Spock goes and throws Kirk off the ship, and no one cares he did that. You can see the desperation they have in the dialogue trying to justify this, especially with McCoy. It doesn't work no matter what. Nothing warrants Spock throwing Kirk off the ship. That wasn't an emotional compromising moment that McCoy had the right to relieve Spock of command, so both guys should have been thrown in the brig. Period. But they needed to get Kirk off the ship at any means necessary. This is a mess, but not the biggest mess in the whole film. That goes to Transwarp beaming. Every single time these writers get stuck in a corner, they write total nonsense to get out of it. You just made space travel meaningless in multiple ways. Not only can you beam people anywhere, from planet to ship to planet, from planet to planet, ship to ship, this ability bypasses shields. So why don't you just beam torpedoes on Nero's ship? End of problem, end of movie. Ships are pointless now. All the events that happen in Into Darkness and beyond shouldn't happen. And because Spock from the future is the one that gave Scotty his own formula, I know you're trying to reference Star Trek 4 with this, but this means this tech is available during Star Trek Picard. So explain to me why I don't see it being used to solve virtually every problem in that show. This is not making Scotty a miracle worker. This is destroying storytelling. And they do it again in the second film of Khan's Blood. I was flabbergasted when I saw this play out.